I'm Kathy Maxwell.
I'm Nathan Maxwell,
And welcome to the Good Faith Bible Study Podcast,
where we'll offer a few additional insights about the Bible study lessons from Good Faith Magazine.
Get the magazine and learn more at goodfaithmedia.org. This podcast focuses on the topic, the crisis of faith, and supports the lesson for July 20th, 2025. In this podcast, I'd like for us to spend some time in 1 Kings 19, exploring Elijah's crisis of faith, his emotional and spiritual despair. What leads Elijah here? What happens when Elijah is at the end of his spiritual rope? And what in Elijah's story might be helpful to us in our own times of faith crisis? The truth is, even the most faithful Christians can feel utterly undone. Elijah was a prophet, for crying out loud. He had done everything right, and yet he still has doubts and very real fears. Have you been here before? By all accounts, everything should be great, but it's not. Or maybe circumstances demonstrably are not great, and your prayers are hitting the ceiling, and though you desperately look for God in all the right places, God is nowhere to be found. Let's join Elijah after he has defeated the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. You can read that story in 1 Kings 18. King Ahab and Elijah have more or less raced back to the royal city of Jezreel. Elijah arrives first, which is actually surprising because Ahab was in a chariot. But when Ahab gets there, he goes straight to Queen Jezebel. One of my favorite Hebrew Bible translators is Robert Alter, who is now professor emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley. His remarkable ability with ancient Hebrew combines with his deep appreciation for how words form narratives to give us careful and creative translations of the Old Testament. If you have a chance, check out his 3-volume translation and commentary on the Old Testament. It was published in 2019. The reference is in the podcast show notes. So all that to say, in Alter's translation, 1 Kings 19:1 takes on a kind of breathless quality as Ahab reports to Jezebel. Here's what the text says. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and all about how he killed all the prophets by the sword. But Jezebel is not intimidated. She responds with a clear, direct threat. She vows to repay Elijah in kind. And Elijah flees into the wilderness when he hears Jezebel's threat. Elijah's success on Mount Carmel and even the downpour of rain that breaks the long drought in the land is not enough when the queen's attention turns to the prophet. It's interesting that Elijah's public success, his very public and proven faith in God, does not necessarily mean that he has the same level of confidence in private. Elijah's words express his despair. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life. Despite Mount Carmel, the king and the queen are still determined to lead Israel away from God. Elijah doesn't see any way forward. His mission as God's prophet has failed. This is a deeply human and a deeply spiritual moment. Elijah is being honest before God, even when it's not proper. This is Elijah saying, look, I'm done. So what does God do? Well, God lets Elijah take a nap, and then God gives him a snack and some water to drink. And then Elijah naps again. Maybe we should pay attention here to the power of a nap and hydration and a snack. Then, when Elijah's physical needs are met, God leads Elijah on a journey. He walks south through the kingdom of Judah into northern Egypt until he comes to a familiar mountain. 1 Kings calls this mountain Mount Horeb, This is Mount Sinai, where God met Moses in the burning bush and later established the Mosaic covenant. Like Moses, Elijah stands on this holy mountain, seeking an encounter with God. Now, when Moses stood there, he was leading a newly freed people through the wilderness as they learned to trust God. And now Elijah serves this same people generations later. And the people are still, in fact, struggling to trust God. While they aren't wandering in the wilderness anymore in Sinai or in the Jordan Rift Valley, they are in a wilderness of the heart. And so, in some sense, is Elijah. Maybe Elijah is desperate to be a prophet like Moses. Moses, who led God's people to the promised land, who talked with God and faced down Pharaoh, who was trusted by the people, mostly, and who had faithfully fulfilled the daunting task given to him by God. Now Elijah was on the mountain, and God is about to show up. But that's where the similarities end. When Moses received the law, the presence of God is marked by lightning and thunder and fire on the mountain. Elijah experiences these things too, a terrible wind smashing the rocks, an earthquake shaking the roots of the mountain, a fire ripping down the slope. But God is not there. Perhaps God is showing Elijah that he is not Moses, and yet he is still called by God. God's presence will come to Elijah a different way, through a whisper. Alter's translation is a sound of minute stillness. In the face of Elijah's greatest fear and doubt, when Elijah says, "God, I am done," God doesn't correct Elijah's theology. God meets him. Faith crisis doesn't mean faithlessness. Burnout, grief, exhaustion, maybe we should see these not as failures of belief, but as invitations to be met by God in a different way. Episcopal priest and celebrated author Barbara Brown Taylor left full-time parish ministry after experiencing exhaustion and spiritual dryness. Though widely admired for her preaching and her pastoral care, she described her departure as a necessary retreat to rediscover her spiritual center. Like Elijah, Taylor had done everything right, but she had reached a place of exhaustion. She writes about this experience in her first memoir, Leaving Church, a memoir of faith. Taylor recalls words that she once heard from Walter Brueggemann. "The world for which you have been so carefully prepared is being taken away from you by the grace of God." In seasons of fear and doubt, when it feels like everything you have prepared for, everything you have dreamed of, everything you have worked for is being taken away from you, when you're in despair, especially then, bring your honest emotional truth to God. Sometimes in those moments, we naturally end up in a cave, like Elijah, when the threat is too great, when our sighs are just too deep, and when our own rope is too short. Barbara Brown Taylor shares that finally God met her not in a pulpit, but in the quietness of her garden, long walks, in new rhythms of life. For Taylor, for Elijah, and for you, the cave is not the end of the story. One of the frequently asked questions on Reverend Taylor's website is, "Did you really leave church?" Taylor responds, "I'm in churches all the time. The title of my first memoir, Leaving Church, was a sleight of hand. It was meant to help all of us explore what we mean when we say church. In my lifetime, the answer is that church includes more people than I ever imagined, leaning into the divine from vastly different angles that all sound familiar to me. No, the cave is not the end of the story, because wherever your cave might be, whatever circumstances might have led you there, God meets you there with an open invitation to rest and be restored. This podcast is produced by Good Faith Media. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
There, you can find a wealth of additional resources, including the 12-volume Nurturing Faith Commentary by longtime lesson writer Tony Cartledge.
It covers every text for every Sunday in the 3-year cycle of the Revised Common Lectionary.
Our podcast music comes from Pond 5. Check out the show notes for more information,
including a transcript and a few other tips for studying Scripture.